"May I have your leftovers, sir?" But when the millionaire looked into her eyes, a miracle happened. The rain hammered against the restaurant window like 1,000 desperate fingers seeking shelter. Inside the upscale bistro, Marcus Chen sat alone at his usual corner table, barely touching his expensive steak dinner. He'd lost his appetite months ago, somewhere between closing his third business deal and realizing he had no one to celebrate with. His phone buzzed with another congratulatory message from a colleague he barely knew. He silenced it and pushed his plate away. That's when he heard the voice, soft, trembling, yet somehow determined. "Excuse me, sir. I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, but may I have your leftovers? If this story moves you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Millionaire in Love for more inspiring tales. Your comments mean the world to me. Share your thoughts below." Marcus looked up, ready to signal the waiter to handle this interruption. But then their eyes met and something inside him froze. The young woman standing beside his table couldn't have been more than 25. Her clothes were worn but clean, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail despite the rain that had obviously soaked her. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Brown, deep, and filled not with the defeat he expected, but with a fierce dignity that seemed to burn through her circumstances. "I'm sorry?" He managed, though he'd heard her perfectly. "Your food, sir." She gestured to his nearly full plate with a thin hand. "If you're finished, I haven't eaten in 2 days, and I promise I'm not usually the kind of person who asks, but..." Her voice cracked slightly before she steadied it. "I'm desperate." The restaurant manager was already rushing over, mortification written across his face. "Miss, you need to leave immediately." Siraj apologized profusely. "Wait." Marcus held up his hand, surprising himself. He studied the young woman more carefully. Despite her obvious hunger, she stood straight. Despite her desperation, she'd said please. Despite everything, she looked him directly in the eye as an equal, not a beggar. "Sit down, sir." Both the woman and manager said simultaneously. "I said sit down." Marcus pulled out the chair across from him. "And bring another menu." "The full menu." The young woman stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. I only asked for the leftovers." "I can't afford..." "Did I ask if you could afford it?" Marcus surprised himself with the gentle edge in his voice. "Please, sit." She hesitated for only a moment before sliding into the chair, her movements careful, as if she was afraid of taking up too much space in the world. The manager retreated, confusion evident in his backwards glances. "I'm Marcus," he said, extending his hand across the table. She looked at it for a long moment before taking it. Her handshake was firm despite her obvious weakness. Elena Rodriguez. Elena, when was the last time you had a proper meal?" She looked down at the white tablecloth. 3 days ago. I had a job at a bookstore, but the owner died and his son closed the business. I'd been saving for my mother's medical treatments back home in the Philippines, so I didn't have much cushion. My landlord needed the rent immediately when I couldn't pay. Everything happened so fast. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "What about family?" "Friends?" A sad smile crossed her face. "I came here alone to send money home. My mother has diabetes and the treatments are expensive. I made a choice, my dignity there or hers. I'd make it again." She looked up at him, and he saw no self-pity in those eyes, only exhausted determination. "I've been applying to jobs all week, but no one wants to hire someone with the eviction notice and no current address." The waiter appeared with the menu, and Marcus ordered without hesitation. "We'll have the filet mignon, the salmon, the pasta special, the soup, and every dessert you have. And please bring some bread immediately." Elena's eyes widened. "Sir, that's too much." "Marcus, call me Marcus." He leaned forward. "And let me tell you something, Elena. 6 years ago, I was sleeping in my car. I'd lost everything in a business venture that failed. I was exactly where you are now, choosing between pride and survival, wondering if asking for help made me weak or smart." She blinked, clearly not expecting this. "You? Me?" He smiled, but it was tinged with old pain. "The only difference between you and me is that someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. An old woman named Mrs. Chen, no relation, funny enough, owned a small restaurant. She let me wash dishes for meals. Never asked questions, never made me feel small. She just gave me a chance to survive long enough to find my way back up." The bread arrived, and Elena reached for it with shaking hands. Marcus politely looked away as she ate, giving her privacy and her hunger. When he looked back, tears were streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I've been trying so hard to be strong, to not break down, and your kindness—" She wiped her eyes with the napkin. "It's the first kindness anyone's shown me since everything fell apart." Marcus felt his own throat tighten. How long had it been since he'd felt anything? Since his success had started, he'd built walls around himself, convinced that emotions were weaknesses and connections were liabilities. He'd become exactly what he'd feared, rich, successful, and completely alone. "Elena, I want to make you an offer," he heard himself say, "but I need you to hear me out before you answer." She nodded, wariness creeping into her expression. "I own several businesses. One of them is a publishing company that acquired a chain of bookstores last month. We're reopening them with new management, new vision. I need people who actually love books, who understand customer service, who have grit." He pulled out his business card. "I'm offering you a job. Manager position. Salary, benefits, signing bonus large enough to cover 3 months' rent anywhere in the city." Elena stared at the card as if it might disappear. "Why? You don't know me. You could be exactly what you appear to be," Marcus interrupted gently. "Someone who's had bad luck but hasn't lost their dignity. Someone who asked for leftovers in a 5-star restaurant because she was hungry, but chose the least intrusive way to do it. Someone who even now is questioning whether she deserves help instead of just taking it. But you don't do this for everyone who asks for food," she said quietly. "No," he admitted, "but something about you reminded me of myself. And more importantly, of what I lost in becoming successful, the ability to see people, really see them." He leaned back. "The truth. I've been successful for 5 years now. I have money, respect, everything I thought I wanted. But I eat alone every night in restaurants like this, and I can't remember the last time I felt anything real. Until you walked up and asked for my leftovers. The food began arriving course after course. They ate together, and somewhere between the soup and the salmon, Elena began to talk. She told him about her mother, about the little village where she grew up, about her dreams of opening a library someday where poor children could come and read for free. She spoke about her father who died when she was young, and how her mother had worked 3 jobs to send her to college. Marcus found himself sharing, too, about his own father's disappointment in his early failures, about the loneliness of success, about how he'd spent years building an empire but forgotten to build a life. "You know what the saddest part is?" Marcus said as they shared a chocolate cake. "I have 17 employees in my main office. I don't know any of their first names. I don't know if they have kids, dreams, struggles. They're just functions to me. Somewhere along the way I became the kind of boss I swore I'd never be." Elena looked at him thoughtfully. "It's not too late to change that, isn't it?" "You changed it tonight," she said simply. "You saw me. You chose to see me. That's always the first step, choosing to notice the people right in front of you." Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been frozen for years. "Will you take the job?" Elena smiled, really smiled for the first time that evening. "On one condition. Name it. You have lunch with your employees. All of them. Learn their names. Their stories." She met his eyes with that fierce dignity again. The Marcus who slept in his car would have done that. Don't let the Marcus who succeeded forget how. He laughed, and it felt rusty, unfamiliar, like an old muscle he'd forgotten he had. "Deal." They talked until the restaurant began to close. Marcus called his driver, and they made sure Elena had a hotel room for the night, a good one. He gave her his direct number and told her to call him in the morning so they could start the paperwork. As the car pulled away, Elena turned back one more time and mouthed 2 words through the window. "Thank you." Marcus stood in the rain, watching until the car disappeared. For the first time in years, he felt something other than empty. The next morning, Elena called right on time. They met at his office, where Marcus was already implementing his promise. He'd asked his assistant to arrange a company lunch, everyone, every department. His assistant had looked at him as if he'd grown a second head. "It's long overdue," Marcus had simply said. Elena started work the following Monday. But something else had started too, a friendship that neither of them expected. Marcus found himself calling her for advice on decisions he used to make alone. She challenged him, pushed him to remember why he'd started building businesses in the first place. Within 3 months, the culture in Marcus's companies had shifted. Employees were smiling more, Turnover decreased. Productivity increased. But more importantly, Marcus knew their names now. He knew that Sarah in accounting was putting her daughter through art school. That Tom in IT was caring for his aging mother. That Jennifer at reception was writing a novel in her spare time. Elena thrived too. The bookstore she managed became the most successful in the chain, not because she pushed sales, but because she made it a community space. The library for poor kids she'd always dreamed of, built right into a business model. 6 months after that rainy night, Marcus stood in the bookstore, watching Elena read to a group of children who reminded him of himself at that age, hungry for stories, for hope, for proof that their circumstances didn't define their futures. She looked up and caught him watching. She smiled and he smiled back, and in that moment, Marcus understood what the real miracle had been that night. It wasn't that he'd helped Elena, it was that she'd saved him. He'd been dying inside his success, drowning in his loneliness, suffocating under the weight of an empty life. And then a young woman had asked for his leftovers, and in her eyes, he'd seen his own reflection, the person he used to be, the person he'd fought so hard to become, the person he'd forgotten he wanted to be. Elena hadn't just asked for food that night. She'd asked for kindness in a world that often had none. She'd asked with dignity when she had every right to feel defeated. She'd reminded him that seeing people, really seeing them, was the only success that mattered. Later that evening, as Marcus prepared to leave the office, he found Elena waiting outside his door. "I wanted to say thank you," she said. "Not for the job, though I'm grateful, but for letting me give you something back. You gave me survival, but you let me give you purpose. That's a fair trade." Marcus felt his eyes sting. "Elena, you gave me much more than that. You gave me my humanity back." She stepped forward and hugged him, brief, warm, the embrace of genuine friendship. "We saved each other, Marcus. That's how miracles work. They're never just one-sided." As Marcus drove home that night, he didn't feel the usual emptiness. His phone buzzed with messages, not from distant colleagues, but from Sarah asking for advice on her daughter's portfolio, from Tom sharing a funny story about his mother, from Jennifer sending him the first chapter of her novel. He had leftovers in a container on his passenger seat. Elena had insisted he take some of the cookies she'd baked for the store. He smiled, remembering a rainy night 6 months ago when leftovers had meant something entirely different. Sometimes miracles don't look like miracles. Sometimes they look like a desperate question in an upscale restaurant. Sometimes they look like an empty, successful man deciding to see the person in front of him instead of the interruption. Sometimes they look like two people saving each other without even realizing that's what they're doing. Marcus pulled into his driveway, but before going inside, he sat for a moment in his car, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he wanted to remember. Remember hunger. Remember desperation. Remember the moment someone chose to see him. Remember that success without humanity isn't success at all. And remember that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is to let them help us too. Did this story touch your heart? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Trillionaire in Love. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or a time when a stranger's kindness changed your life. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of our shared humanity. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of believers in the power of compassion. See you in the next story.